if I knew now 20 years on the fight that it would be to keep being able to manufacture everything the way that we do, and starting a business from scratch with no business experience and all that stuff, I don't know if I would have done it. But and don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful to be in this position to be able to do what we do. It is amazing. But you need to be prepared for the long haul. This is not a short thing. And one of the things I think with the digital products, I think we are so used to instant gratification, instant feedback. I can get a digital thing, I can get it up there, bang, we're making money. Going into manufacturing is really hard. You've just got to be prepared to work. And lots of people are very happy to work. But the level of work doing something, A, new, B, you're creating a market. There was no market when we started doing this stuff. We had to educate a market to create our market.
Thank you so much for having this conversation, Dan. Really appreciate it. And we'll go into the GigRig and talk about your story and how you guys are approaching product development over your 20-year history now, right?
No, 20 years. Yeah, mad. Yeah, no, it's my pleasure, man. It's great to meet you.
So yeah, the origin story of GigRig. That's what I'd really like to start with you. And 20 years you've been building the company, and I guess from my perspective, at least, I'm aware of the customer facing developments you've done,
right?
What product range you've got nowadays. But 20 years ago, the seed of the idea, where did GigRig really begin?
Yeah, so GigRig really began in Australia, I guess, as far as the idea for it. So I was obsessed with guitar growing up. I don't know how long we've got and how much detail you want me to get into, but I'll do the highlights.
The cliff notes, maybe.
Yeah, I was brought up in quite a religious family. I didn't have a dad that listened to Led Zeppelin or any cool guitar music. So I didn't have any idea what tone was, or there was none of that stuff in the house. But I heard guitar on the radio and I thought, this is amazing, and it just looked like such a cool job. It just instantly connected with me. Apparently, when my mum was pregnant with me, she was learning to play guitar, and she only stopped when she couldn't grab the guitar anymore. So anyway, I was obsessed with guitar since I was a kid. Never really being around, apart from my brother had some cool records, and he played guitar, and so he showed me a couple of things, and I just took it and went wild with it. And I remember figuring out tapping. So crazy. My brother showed me that thing where you bend the fourth up to the fifth and you hammer on, and I thought it was the best sound I'd ever heard. And then I worked out that I could do tap notes, and I just went nuts with it. And then my brother brought home Van Halen 1984, and I heard Eddie doing it, and I burst into tears because I thought I'd invented it. So anyway, but so I hadn't heard that stuff, but I was just all I could think about for all the way through school, just wanted to play guitar. But because I had no idea about tone or anything like that, I had my concept was same as in every other industry. If it's new and if it's state of the art, it must be better. Otherwise, why would you do it? Why would you produce something brand new that doesn't sound better, isn't better in every way than the previous thing? What's the point? So anyway, I got right into tech. In the late 80s, I had like one of the first Roland GP8s in Australia, and I say mid 80s, I think, and really got into MIDI, and because that just made sense. I would hear things on the radio and think, well, and I'd try to dial in these sounds. It had solid state amps, because why would you buy a valve amp? It's old technology, and I've got
Right.
racks and MIDI, and this is the future, surely. Then I was at a guitar store, and this really helpful Canadian guy. This is all happening in Australia, in Sydney. He just had this old Sovtech head, and I plugged into it, and I'm like, why does this sound awesome? Couldn't really work it out, but anyway, thought this is great, and could see that everyone people were still using valve heads, and okay, great. Plugging all my technology into this stuff, brilliant. And then I was in the studio one day. I'd managed to get a couple of really great gigs in Australia. So I toured a lot with some really wonderful artists, but I'd always struggled tonally. Just me personally, I'd always felt, like I guess most of us, I wanted it to be better.
Mm.
And I was in the studio one day, and the producer says, I really want you to try this. I think you'll like it. And he pulled out an old Electric Mistress flanger. And I went, are you drunk? Like, in my rack, there's that knob there, that button says flanger on it. And that's old, and this is brand new. This cost me a lot of money. There is no way that thing is going to sound anything like that. And that flanger effect is garbage. It's like, just humor me. And he had an old deluxe reverb in the studio, and I was actually in the control room, so I wasn't even near the mic. And just plugged this deluxe mistress in, and I hear this. I just hit this chord, and I'm just sat there going, just couldn't believe it. It was just this. It was such a visceral, instant connection. I'd never felt anything like it. And then I spent like an hour with the rack trying to dial in the flanger. And it wasn't that it wasn't close. It was so far from being close that it was embarrassing. And anyway, so I grabbed a credit card. I went down to Guitar Crazy at Coogee and spent a couple of grand there with Wazza, the guy that was behind the counter at the time, and bought an Electric Mistress, Phase 90, CU1, which I still have those. I bought a Tube Screamer, which I never got on with. I'd plug these things in. The sounds were just mind-blowing. The problem that I had, though, was because I was so used to having this MIDI equipment, and I'd have the gigs that I was doing were quite complex. I'd had like an acoustic guitar on a stand, and I'd have to go into this like hard rock bit, and then it was really quick changes. You got time to step on one sound, and everything has to change.
The tap dancing.
And the tap dancing, and I couldn't do it. But not only that, what I found was, when I started plugging these effects in together, that magic thing, that connection that I had, just was dissipated. Yeah, these things are amazing, but I've got to find a way to be able to hit a button and have them all go on. And I need to be able to bypass these things. And the idea started to form. And this is, pre-internet. The internet was around, but it was like sort of young. Now, I couldn't just go and Google search this stuff. And anyway, there was an artist called Johnny Diesel in Australia. His real name's Mark Wazott. Astonishing guitar player, singer. Really, really beautiful. And a friend of mine was doing some tech for him, and he just had this new rig built by Pete Cornish, who builds these amazing guitar rigs and builds for all the big rock stars. And my friend had never really done MIDI before, and they had these reverb processors in the rack, and they couldn't work out how to get the MIDI to work. He knew that I knew MIDI, so asked me to go down and give him a hand. And I went down and saw this rig, and man alive, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And he had that thing. He did one button, and all these effects would turn on and off. He'd turn some things on and some things off. And it was beautiful. He'd made a receptacle for his mic stand. It goes in the center with fuzz pedals and everything. It was really astonishing. But that rig cost about the same as a house did in Sydney at the same time. Anyway, I was lamenting this fact that there's no way a gigging musician like me would ever be able to afford something like that. And the producer says, well, go and make it yourself then. He's sick of me whinging about it. And just got a real bee in my bonnet about it. And just, okay, I'm going to do this. So I had a couple of tech friends who started teaching me bits and pieces of electronics, and I sort of started making headway. And then I met a girl who's now my wife. Been married for 20-something years now, 22 years. But was playing playing at the boat shed in Manly, the Manly boat shed, and she had been playing in bands with the keyboard player from XTC, who are my favorite band, and one of my favorite guitar players, Dave Gregory, and we were playing XTC tunes that night, which is why she came and introduced herself. I ended up moving to the UK with her, and I was still studying, and I'd got a cheap computer and was finding out what I could online, but I sort of hit my talent level with I could do the simple stuff no problem, but when it came to digital programming of being able to turn, doing this with relays, programming the relays to turn on and off and storing the information, that was like a level beyond. So I started looking for an engineer that wanted to give me a hand, and eventually, after calling 20 different engineers, I found an engineer who also played guitar, and he understood the idea, and he came over to my house. He didn't live too far away, and he had this little Zoom multi-effect. And because he thought I was just drunk, talking rubbish about these old, fuzz faces and, modulation stuff. And he brought his little Zoom thing over and he goes, yeah, well, this is my sounds. And I go, okay, well, these are the sounds and he heard these things, like, wow. Yeah, his name's Dave Mapleston, and we started working on this idea. And eventually in 2004, we released our first product. I think I've got one here. Let's see if can you see this thing? Man, it's right. Hang on. Okay, so this was our first product. This is the Pro 14. Look at that. Right. So here's the idea. I was a big Star Wars fan. I wanted something that would look like it wouldn't be out of place in the Star Wars film, which is why it's the most un-rock and roll thing you've ever seen. It's white. It's so silly. But anyway.
Yeah, I think R2-D2 looking at it right now.
There you go. That's exactly it. So the idea was that I would have my effects pedals plugged into these effects loops, right? And then these effects loops would be controlled by these dip switches here. So when I pressed that foot switch, it would turn on. I just turn on these dip switches, and then they would automatically turn on these loops. So my signal path would bypass the pedals I wasn't using and would just go through the pedals that I wanted when I hit that button. So what did that mean? It meant that I could program with the press of one foot switch the effects I wanted to come on. And when I went to a different foot switch, I could turn those ones off and turn other ones on. So it got rid of the tap dance. But the biggest thing was my signal was no longer running through the pedals I didn't want them to run through when I wasn't using it. But the other thing, just quickly, which is a really massive thing, was next to, you see these little blue wheels here. So we put in on the output a programmable amplifier. So this was on, from the very first product we did, because I was such a massive fan of vintage modulation, and especially the flanger. But the problem that I had with the Mistress was that every time I turned it on, because of the nature of comb filtering, it has almost like psychoacoustic property where you turn it on and the phase cancellation effect drops you out of the mix. It drops you just enough. If you sound great, you turn it on and it just drops you enough to pull you out of the mix. So I wanted to be able to when I hit a preset, actually turn on the amplifier on the output and adjust that level to bring that back up to where I want it to be. So it meant that I could have an overdrive pedal and I could have the same overdrive pedal, but use it for a solo sound by adjusting the gain. And that was a really big deal because that's been one of the most important things in all of our switches, the idea of being able to adjust the gain. That also had an input, like a buffer that you could turn on, but it was a set level. Whereas now, with G2 and G3, you've been able to program the input and output stages, but you could still bypass them completely, which means that you could use, germanium transistor fuzzers and stuff, things that are very sensitive to input impedance changes. So yeah, that was 2004.
Just to pause the story right there, actually, because you made me think of, it's just such a common successful founder story when you come across a real world problem yourself,
Right.
particularly in something you're interested in, that you're passionate about.
Yep.
And you're trying to find ways of resolving that, and maybe you even come across a solution for it,
Right.
but it's not fit for purpose. It doesn't work for your specific case, and that could be because, as you said, it's too expensive.
Sure.
It's too big and cumbersome. Maybe it kind of fits the cost and form fit, but maybe there's certain things which just make it and not a viable product at that time. And it sounds like you just really went all in on that and said, right, let's make it cheaper, let's make it affordable, let's look at the form.
Dude, I didn't think of any of that stuff. So I'd never run a business before. I didn't have a marketing plan. It's like, I just think this is really cool. There was no concept of let's make this to a budget. The commercial aspect of it was so secondary to what I selfishly wanted. I had a sort of a realization about this thing that you're talking about, which is very different now when we do products, because I've got staff now and we've got monthly costs that we have to cover. So, when we develop a product now, it's very different. But in the early days, none of that came into it. And I learned very quickly that it was an expensive time suck of approaching a product without any real idea of the commercial viability of it. But if I had looked at the commercial viability of it, I probably never would have started it, because it was impossible to do market research for. In that, what we were doing, no one had seen anything like this before. So it wasn't just what's the market. It's like, how much is it going to cost to educate the market? We were selling, I think that the first units cost like 700 quid. We were selling this unit for 700 quid in 2004 that made no sound. Good one, Dan.
Right.
Market that. But what it did, so what was fascinating, my first customer is a guitar player called Mark Johns, who's become my guitar teacher. He's been a very dear friend of mine for over 20 years. Astonishing guitar player. We were at a friend's wedding where I met him, and I was telling him my idea, and he says, so he used to play guitar for Ray Davies and was his touring guitar player for a long time, and he's recorded with everyone. And he says, oh, this sounds interesting. Bring it down to the studio. And he had his pedal board with his pedals, and I plugged in my board, and as soon as I plugged it in and started switching things on and off, he just got it. And I knew that there are players out there who will just get it. But it was very difficult to put a picture of this thing up and then lines of text that tells you what to do, and then hope people, A, are interested enough in the picture to read what it does and then read to a point where they might find it something that they're interested in. Very, very difficult. So it's something so nuanced and so, I mean, it's the niche of the niche of the niche, this thing. And then I saw a YouTube video, some guy who had a little, like a Silvertone amp or something, and he was just playing it. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Maybe there's something there, because maybe that means I could actually film myself, show people what it actually does, instead of trying to get across in text and stuff. The idea behind the YouTube thing was actually I can get in front of people with it. And that became a massive part of the success of how we're able to move on. But that was a long, very slow burn with YouTube, because we were doing that with no money. We had no production. No one did in the early days of YouTube. But, having never done anything like that before, and everything that we did in those days, it was just me. My wife started helping out very early on. David did the design, but all of that stuff was, it was just me with no money. So I was gigging 5 nights a week, and get spare money and buy little cameras and whatever I could afford. And I go back to the really early YouTube videos that we did, and man alive, they're just, I'm not embarrassed by them, but I kind of am. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a good snapshot of where we were. And
it's nice to see where you've come from.
Completely. Yeah, that's great. But no, that was a really interesting thing, because I just knew there was enough people out there who were into pedals. The pedals were sort of taking off. They hadn't really exploded at that point, but they were sort of taking off to a point where there's some really cool things available. I mean, Strymon wasn't out by then. The Time Factor was out, the Eventide Time Factor. A couple of really cool things were being released. And so we just sort of caught the front edge of it before it all went nuts.
Yeah, I mean, the whole pedal market's a fascinating thing, because you said earlier that it's like the niche of the niche of the niche. Those decisions to go into different niches, what were the thought process around that?
It was only ever about, there's a problem here that needs solving. For every product that we've released, there's probably 4 that we haven't. Once we got the initial thing out the road, because I've always loved solving problems, but it's like, it can't be solutions looking for a problem. You know what I mean? Which I see a lot of people doing. They've got to be real. So, and that's one thing, I've got a really great team with me and who are really good at saying, that's really interesting, Dan, but maybe not. Because I love solving problems. If I start with that, then it's always interesting. Unless it's something that I'm really interested in, there's no passion in it for me. Money, I'm not passionate about money. I'm just not. It's fantastic. Fun vouchers are brilliant, but it's never been the driving force of anything that I've done. You can just ask my sister, who I've loaned money off since I was a kid. But all I've ever wanted to do was play guitar. But in that, I've always had, I've had the heart of an engineer, because I've always loved, identifying things. I could sit down with a guitar and, take it apart and try and make things a little bit better. I remember when I was 18, I bought a Gem when they came out, and they had one of the first Gems, like, in Australia. And
for those who don't know, by the way, that's a Steve Vai signature guitar, I believe.
Guitar, yeah. Right? And this thing was so expensive. And I was at my band's house, and I loved the double locking tremolo and doing all that squeal stuff. And I remember making this noise and then pulling up the trem as hard as I could, going, oh, if only you could go a bit further, and taking the back off and then looking where the trem was blocking, and then getting a chisel out and chiseling the back of the where so I could go right like all the way up until it like almost snapped the strings. It was so great. But I've always done that. And when I got into pedals, I just found there was so many things that we could do better, and having seen how going to see amazing bands touring in Australia and hearing how they sounded, going, why don't I sound like that? What are they doing different? And then finding out, power is really important. Up to that point, it was all daisy chains. Why is it when I plug a digital pedal in with a daisy chain, everything starts to squeal? And then finding out about isolation and, and that whole journey with that. And what's really interesting with all of this stuff, because I'm super passionate about playing guitar, I still play every day. I still study. I'm still obsessed with it. But I'm also obsessed with finding out as much as I can to make these systems as good as they can. And I got some great engineers who've worked with us over the years. But it's amazing how much they'll come into it with an engineer's mindset and go, well, there's no way that can make any difference. And it's like, I need you to spend 2 weeks with me, and we're going to go through this stuff, and then you tell me what you think at the end of it. And without fail, every single engineer's gone, guitar land and all those silly impedances, it's a dark art. Now, why am I saying that? It's because when you're passionate about something, and you might not have an engineering degree or a degree in marketing or whatever, but you never discount that your experience, it's valuable. What you bring to the table that you have picked up over the years of just being passionate and being in something, it's irreplaceable. And so, like, every engineer that I've had working with us, I've literally had to show them this stuff, and they've had to hear it. And it's like, so now we have little rules within our design about the amount of headroom that it has to have, and about, certain, impedances, and that in a normal situation, guitar's weird because in a normal design, you just buffer the input. Doesn't matter what you do then, because the inputs, the circuit's buffered, and you can be quite lazy with the layout because of what we do, where you can't change the sound of anything and you can't buffer that input, so that every track has to be done in a certain way that we're not picking up any noise. We're doing just direct connection. It's really, really tricky to do. But being so into it, it's like, I want to find out the right way to do it. How do we do this? And it's super, super valuable.
It's just a quick anecdote. I think last week's podcast that you hosted, I was listening, and I think someone asked a question about one of your products that maybe they're having a certain issue with it, or they wanted
Okay.
to do this thing, they weren't sure what to do. You guys were discussing it, and then I think you kind of paused for a moment and thought, I've got an idea. Actually, I think I got a product idea, and then yeah, I'll write it down. Okay, good.
So
All right, I'll come back to that later.
that product has been designed. The prototype's on the way.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's how fast it happens, is it?
Well, so this is the beauty of being in a small company. We can turn on the dime. The big companies that are it's like a big ship, right? It's really hard to move, but we're in a little speedboat. But it's the bigger that you get, you are forced. The bigger the company, the bigger the boat has to be, because you've got higher turnover, but you've got higher costs. You've got to keep more stock, and so it becomes harder then to make those quick decisions. So staying small has enabled us to be nimble with these sorts of things. And if I have an idea, I can sit down with our engineers and just go, right, this is it. Because we've been doing this so long, most of the signal path ideas are culminations of problems we've already solved. So they're easy. But if there are new problems, then it's really fun solving those. But then what you're talking about before, understanding the market, is there a need for this, comes into play. Like, so for example, we had the first version of the Wetterbox, the wet box came out because someone wanted to do something in parallel. And I thought, that's a really cool idea. Oh, no, sorry, it wasn't parallel. I mean, it is parallel, but someone was asking about delay trails from an analog delay. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. What if, instead of turning the pedal off, what if I just mute the input to the pedal and have the output of the pedal going into a mixer, and so that you can turn the pedal off but still have the delay trails over a different sound? And the wet box was born. Now, solving that problem and getting all the noise and everything to a point where you could blend things, that's great. Compared to how many we were selling, it's like it didn't really make sense to carry on with it, because we sort of worked out that we could do it so much better and do stereo and, all this stuff. As a product, it wasn't successful by any means, but it actually led us to go somewhere else. You know what I mean? So traditionally that would have been called a failure. But because it gave us ideas, it's like, okay, that's great, which led to the Wetterbox, which we've, it's been in production now for years, and it's sort of a staple of what we do. Sometimes those failures actually lead to something really, really cool.
What was some of the common reasons for deciding whether something is, good enough to put to market, and other things just stay on the drawing board and don't get put
Yeah.
into production? What are the big sort of commonalities there?
How much I want it is the first one. No, okay, so if I really believe in it, I think because of, obviously, it was so before, but what we do is so niche, and not necessarily everyone in the business will understand. Okay, let's create a small, low current 4 output power supply that's an add-on to things. Not everyone's going to understand the need for that, but if I really believe in it, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. There's a hole here. The pedal boards, there are so many great pedal boards out there. Why did we do another pedal board? It's because where our expertise lies is in such a niche area, where we saw we were struggling with the boards that we could get hold of. And it's like, okay, can I solve this problem? And then a moment of inspiration and banging pens into bits of cardboard, and then say, everyone, come and check this thing out. When I did the sliding tier, but it took 2 years from that point to get to production, because that was something. There are lots of unknowns for us because we'd never done anything like that before.
Yeah,
We'd
sure.
done lots of metal work for our products, but actually creating a pedal board. But because we knew so clearly, we knew what we wanted to achieve. We knew pedal boards because we've built so many of them and have used them for decades. It's like, okay, there's a very clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve, a clear understanding of our market, because our market's different. There's the pedal market, but the pedal market we're a small part of that pedal market. If everyone can, if the whole team can see it, that's great. But if only I can see it, I've got to really fight for it. But it also means that I need to understand the value of my team and their experience, and be able to say, actually, you're right. I'm going to think about this a bit longer. Or I say, this is, I really believe in this. But yeah, it does come down to that. And some have been great and some not so great, but it's always fun. It's always fun.
What are some of the challenges and advice that, going back 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you would have loved to know back then to save you some money, some resourcing, some time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Right. Being completely honest, Some people get upset with me with this answer, and let me explain it a bit. If I knew now, 20 years on, the fight that it would be to keep being able to manufacture everything, the way that we do, and starting a business from scratch with no business experience and all that stuff, I don't know if I would have done it. But and don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful to be in this position to be able to do what we do. It is amazing. But you need to be prepared for the long haul. This is not a short thing. And one of the things I think with the digital products, I think we are so used to instant gratification, instant feedback. I can get a digital thing, I can get it up there, bang, we're making money. Going into manufacturing is really hard. You've just got to be prepared to work. And lots of people are very happy to work. But the level of work doing something, A, new, B, you're creating a market. There was no market when we started doing this stuff. We had to educate a market to create our market. And now, I wouldn't say it's harder now, but you get lost in the noise now. There's so much stuff if you don't know what you're doing. So we've really invested in advertising. Look, I'm the other one half of that pedal show, which was hugely important in getting us out there. But for what we do, because it's the niche nature of it, we're not making an overdrive pedal saying, hey, this is great, it's on some rock stars board. We still need to fight the good fight in getting the message out there. So we do a lot of advertising, and it's been great. But yeah, it's a very different approach, like especially now, and in the UK, we've had a lot of talent leave the UK. We've had a lot of amazing engineers and manufacturing companies and stuff just not being able to compete anymore. It's very tricky. If you have an idea that you want to see, you really think you've got something amazing, more power to you. Document everything. And if you really believe in it, you're going to need to put your money behind it. Asking someone else to put their money behind something that you haven't put that into yourself is, which I have seen people try and do. It's like, you really need to believe it. Okay, I was on the phone with Seal last night. We're doing a rig for him. Seal is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met. The guy is, seriously, he should just go on tour talking to people.
Spoken about tour.
Absolutely. Yeah. You would just feel leaving jacked, I promise you. And he said to me last night, I'll never forget this. He said, I grew up in London, and I was also around a lot of talented people. He said, but the thing that I had, that I knew I had, is that I just believed with every ounce of my being. I just believed. And it's like, yeah, if you really need to believe in what you're doing, because it's really hard. The thing that I had going for me, so you've got a genius. I'm not saying I'm genius, by the way. Imagine on this side, you've got a genius who knows everything. And on this side, you've got someone who is just too dumb to know when to quit, right? The end result is the same. Because there have been times, man, it's like if I could have got out, I totally would. And I, was envious of people with a normal 9-to-5 job. I obviously don't feel like that now, but you just need to be prepared for it to be hard work. But the satisfaction and the gratification that comes from seeing something that you willed into being, sheer force of will has materialized, and it's an extraordinary thing. It really is. And I would encourage you, if you're looking at doing something, if you're an entrepreneur, you've got an idea, we're only here once, right? We're here for a good time, not a long time. Absolutely give it a go.
Yeah.
Or the only thing that I would, just to reiterate, a good idea and a pound will get you a cup of coffee. There are so many ideas behind it. What is lacking with all this stuff is the work that goes into the idea to actually make it happen. That's the thing.
Yeah,
Does that
some
make
really great
sense?
points there. Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I mean, what keeps you driven?
I still love it. I genuinely, I still love it. I've got a really wonderful team, and the musicians that I work with inspire me every day. I don't wake up in the morning and look for reasons to keep doing it. I get up in the morning, I'm really excited to get into work. Apart from the GigRig channel, the YouTube show, I've got another YouTube show with a guy called Mick Taylor. We've got a YouTube show called That Pedal Show, which has been so much fun, and has had it's a small channel in terms of big YouTube things, but in our market, it's we've had the opportunity to talk to some really great people and have made so many friends. Like, our first interview we ever did was with a guitar player called Andy Timmons, who's now one of my closest friends. And we've connected with a bunch of people who share the same passion. And so Mick's a good example of this. In musical terms, we come from very different parts of the musical stratosphere, right? He's a Stevie Ray Vaughan, blues, like he does that stuff as good as anyone. He was astonishing. I did the jazz thing, and I love chords and harmony, and I'm into prog, and there would be, like, in the Venn diagram, there's only a little bit that sort of. However, just being into music and being into guitar and being passionate about feeling connected, that is a lot to have in common with someone. Playing in a band. Have you ever been out to dinner and tried to explain to someone who's never been in a band what it's like and what you share musically and spiritually when you're playing with someone with music, where you are reacting, you're not speaking, but there are things happening between you? How do you explain that to someone who's not musical, who's never been in a band?
There was a moment a few weeks ago, actually. I was in the studio with a few members of the band, and we were just jamming, coming up with ideas, extending some riffs and stuff. And there was a moment where we just all locked in together, and we just started creating a sound which sounded exciting,
Right.
vibrant,
Yep.
and all of us just looked up at each other at the exact same spot and just smiled. I was like, yes,
So
that's it.
I
It's right
truly
there.
believe that what you experienced and what we experience as musicians and listening to music and that stuff, it is the closest thing we have to real magic in the world,
Hmm.
right? I really believe that. And, like, I'm still best friends with some of the guys I was in my first band with. And so when you find that, and there's a community built around that, which we've, lucky enough to have with what we do at GigRig and Pedal Show, and it's really wonderful finding people who share that passion. So we now have enough people that we've connected with, that the customers inspire us, the team, our team connecting with the customers, and it's joyous. If you're in a situation where you're doing something that you're passionate about, you're doing something with people who share that passion, and you can make it work, it really is an extraordinary thing. If you're, like, in the music industry, and certainly what we do, you can certainly make a great living out of it, but the privilege to be able to do something that you love and with people that you love, man, it's like that's something that most people don't experience. So I feel very honored I'm able to do that. And it makes all the hard work worth it. It's still really great fun.
Dan, it's been fascinating. It's been varied. It's been technical. It's been all sorts of stuff. And yeah,
and a
thank you.
tangent or two. But yeah, mate, no,
Thank you.
you're so
Yeah.
welcome. You're so welcome.
No, it's been really, really great conversations. For those who aren't aware of GigRig already and that pedal show and everything else, where can people find you, both in terms of the music side and the product side?
Yeah, so it's That Pedal Show on YouTube and thatpedalshow.com. If you want to see what we do with our products, it's thegigrig.com. And if you're on Facebook or anything like that, if you just type in electric guitar pedal, I'm sure you'll be hit with one of our ads. Yeah. But if you're interested in that stuff, and like I said, I love the engineering side of it and that problem solving, and I do hope that people who are into that stuff, there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of joy to be had, doing that sort of thing. And I think, especially in the UK, I do hope that there's some such talented people, and we work with some really great suppliers and stuff, and I do hope that we start to see a resurgence of that. I will say that the current government in the UK isn't making things a lot of fun for small business owners, but if you've got an idea and you want to see it come into fruition, get amongst it. Give it a good go.
Good stuff. Thanks, Dan.
You're welcome, buddy.